Bonjour, good morning. Thank you for coming to the National Press Theatre. We have with us today Grand Chief Derek Nepinak from the Association of Manitoba Chiefs, Grand Chief Gordon Peters from the Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians, Chief Craig Makinaw, Ermineskin Cree Nation, Chief Okimaw Wallace Fox from the Onion Lake Cree Nation, and Grand Chief Mike Delisle from the Mohawk Council of Ganawake. My name is Kim McCrail, and I will be moderating the conference. We'll start with some statements from each of our guests, and then we'll take your questions. And we'll start with Grand Chief Derek Nepinak, please.
Bonjour, Nuichuagana. Niben Makwan Dijnakaz Makwan Totem. Good morning, members of the media. Before I comment on the Manitoba Chiefs' continued rejection of the First Nations Education Act, I'd like to acknowledge the Algonquin peoples who have lived here in their ancestral homelands for thousands of years before the first cold gray stones were cut to build the institutions of the recently arrived Canadian government. I'd also like to acknowledge and say miigwech to the pipe carriers, the fire keepers, and our ceremonial people who keep our spirits strong to protect our treaties with one another and with the Crown, so that we may someday build relationships based in mutual respect and prosperity. This new education bill is outside of the vision and optimism that many of us hold for a prosperous treaty-based relationship. I'm here to represent the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs as the Grand Chief, which represents 61 communities in Manitoba. All of those communities are members of the Assembly of First Nations. I, as a treaty person with children in our education system, will say that the birthright of my children cannot be negotiated away from a conference room floor in Ottawa after a short discussion and a pre-negotiated resolution. Any mandate to negotiate anything respecting the education of our children has to flow from each community's meaningful participation in a respectful recognition of the treaty relationship. This is not achieved from an AFN forum that is inaccessible to the vast majority of our peoples living throughout our homelands. Part of our message here is that the bill cannot be legitimized by a manufactured consent advanced by propaganda and misrepresentation in the media and throughout our political networks. When we say that we have a treaty right to education, we're saying that we hold an unrelinquished jurisdiction to design and implement the path towards prosperity for our children that are in their most vulnerable phases of their early lives. We know that we must nurture the spirits of our children in their culture and in their language in order to help them set their true identity. With a strong Indigenous identity, our children can accomplish great things and help build a future of prosperity for everyone to enjoy from a treaty-based relationship. The residential school system was a direct attack on the prosperity of our people by denying the potential of our children. I believe that this bill is tarnished by the same thinking that gave way to the creation of the residential school system. Bill-C33 is not about our control of education. It's a broad discretion granted to the minister to appoint intervention mechanisms. It's about delegated and limited participation in advisory committees. It's about a limited participation in the administration of education. We already have that in place. This bill offends the treaty relationship, and we must reject it to preserve the opportunity for a truly empowered treaty-based relationship. Miigwech.
Thank you. And we'll hear from Grand Chief Peters, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gordon Peters. I'm from the Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians, but I also hold the portfolio for education for the region of Ontario. We come here this morning to be able to address this because we assume that most Canadians will never see this issue from the way that we see it. They will not be able to see this because they have been taught that we've come from somewhere in Asia, that we've come across the Bering Strait, that we have no a social system or system of governance. And yet, you know, this process that goes on, they tell us about this accountability or lack of accountability in our communities. Over 96% of our communities remain accountable. Those audits go to the federal government. They are clean audits, and they have no difficulty being able to do those. And that overall process that we deal with within Canada right now is brought to us via the doctrine of discovery, which is still used in Canada, which is a papal bull that basically said our lands were free and anybody could take our lands in any way that they wanted to. and our resources. And so that's what we're dealing with today. On June 11th, 2008, Prime Minister Harper said that assimilation has no place in this country. Yet we look at this bill that's in front of us today, and assimilation is alive and well. It still has ministerial control. There are still bylaws that our communities place. When we talk about a new approach to being able to change the low rates of graduation of our children, there are no new approaches within this particular document that they've got for us, this bill. Nothing new in here. We have the same old thing. The minister still has control. Bylaws are in place. We've got still got the oversight. We still have the existing agreements. They want us to incorporate our education boards. So I don't think anything is really dramatically changing this. There is no approach, no new approach to this. We live in a world in our own homelands where there is constant denial of our inherent rights and there are constant violations of our treaties with the Crown. And you don't know, but the Government of Canada in this adversarial relationship spends approximately $2 billion a year in legal fees. Now that's substantial, because when the Royal Commission report came on Aboriginal people, the Minister of Indian Affairs put up the bill to the press, and he said, $56 million, he said, think of how many houses we could have built with this. $2 billion, think of how many children we could have educated under a new approach if we weren't involved in this kind of adversarial relationship with the federal government. So Canada, I think they've got a lot to be able to go yet to be able to get to a point to be able to deal with us and our inherent rights and to be able to recognize treaties that exist. It's ironic that today, where is Canada? They're trying to protect the people of Romania, and they're out there saying they want to protect their democracy, their rights, and we're here in our own homelands, and yet we are not offered the same thing from Canada to protect our democracy, to protect our rights, and ensure our children get the basic fundamental education that they need to be able to survive. In our world first, and then in the broader Canadian context as well.
Thank you, Chief Makinaw.
Good morning. I've been at Parliament in the last year, I'd say about 6 or 7 times, making presentation on different bills from Bill-C33, C45 up to now, and it's the same process that's being done, and it infringes on our treaty inherent rights as First Nations people of this country. So, you know, with this bill again being presented, and now they made first presentation to the Parliament last little while here. It's the same process being done again. We're not being consulted fully, and it doesn't respect our treaty inherent rights. So, you know, that's the concern I bring as Chief from Ermineskin, that we're not being consulted the right way in regards to this bill and other bills that have been presented in the last few years. So, you know, it's the way this process has been going has to change, and until we get this full and meaningful free, prior, informed consent process in place, we'll have better discussion down the road. But right now, I see this as a problem with this bill being pushed through, and the treaty holders haven't been fully consulted on this, and it's just being pushed through. So I have concern on that process, and it has to be addressed. And you know, and so for myself, I reject this bill as the way it's written presently. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Chief Okimaw Wallace Fox.
Good morning, Tatumskadno, Simantui. I come from Treaty 6 territory. I represent 5,500 people. Not once have we been consulted on this bill. I want to speak about the sovereign relationship our people had and still have today, and the inherent relationship from the Creator, the right that was given to us to educate our kids and our people. At the time of the treaty, it took 2 sovereigns to enter into a treaty. It took our ancestors and the Queen to enter into a treaty relationship. Canada was not in the picture at the time, but they inherited that right and responsibility to maintain the honor of the Crown of that treaty relationship. We in Onion Lake have not been provided any consultation through this whole exercise. We have made public statements, public release, press releases, rejecting this bill. The Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations is a part of the AFN. We, as a collective, the chiefs, rejected this bill at FSIN in the region and territory that I come from. There is no process of the free, prior, and informed consent of our people in this whole exercise. And this is unacceptable to our people. Prior to the newcomer coming to this land, we had our systems intact, we had our governance systems intact, we had everything in place prior to treaty. Today, we live in one of the worst conditions, as many of our colleagues have indicated. Canadian society does not understand the general public of what we have to endure as people. This is a farce. I speak on behalf of our people in the community, the territory from Treaty 6 that I come from. There is no such thing as First Nation education, controlled education, when the minister has the ultimate control. Once again, it's the federal government dictating arbitrarily to good little Indians that we know what's best for you. The media has twisted many things in respect to what our position is. Only the Creator will see the truth. And that's who we work for, and that's who I'm ultimately accountable to, and to our people in Onion Lake Cree Nation. There is no control of our people in this education process. We have an inherent right to educate our own children. We always had that since time immemorial, before the newcomer came onto Turtle Island. We never relinquished that at the treaty-making process. We still maintain that. We have developed our own education law, supported, endorsed by our membership, citizens of Onion Lake Cree Nations. We are continuously establishing those parameters as our people have done since time immemorial. The only difference is it was all oral. Now it is in written context in our territory. We will continue to maintain that position and reassert that sovereign relationship the Creator had lent us on this earth. And that's the relationship, that treaty relationship that this government and subsequent governments have never looked at and respected. And we will continue to stand on that basis for our generation and 7 generations into the future, as our ancestors have done. Thank you.
Thank you. And Grand Chief Mike Delisle.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. Segos Oguego. Good morning, everyone. Bienvenue. It's hard for me not to be angry this morning. I've been asked in many venues by press, media, and my own people why we're not being heard. And that's why I agreed to come here this morning to speak to you, along with my fellow chiefs and colleagues here. We're angry, but we're trying to utilize whatever venue is possible, this being one of them, to get our message across. Let me be clear from the beginning. We are in outright opposition, and our position remains clear and strong that we are in opposition of whatever they call this bill. It was first deemed the First Nation Education Act, renamed and bastardized into what it's called today with the word control put in the middle, and it's absolutely not that. Kahnawake has been in control of our education system going on 5 generations, if not 5 decades now, and we will not relinquish that, as my colleagues again have said. We are going to utilize every means possible to ensure that not only Minister Valcour, but more importantly, the federal government of this country they consider Canada, hear what we have to say, and will not relinquish our control of education. It's the foundation basis of everything within our culture, within our part of the world, if you will, on Turtle Island. And for them to be able to, in one breath, apologize for what they did through residential schooling, and then in the next breath, several years later, come up with this bill, as they call it, to, again, give control back to First Nations communities is absurd. What they need to do is have not only full and informed consent from First Nations communities, but real and true dialogue based on our historic relationships. They've never done that. Minister Valcourt has stood in front of you as well as his parliament saying extensive consultation has been done. He's never spoken to us. And I'm not only talking about Ganawage. I've spoken to Regional Chief of the Assembly of First Nations Quebec and Labrador on Friday, who gave me the authority, if you want to call it that, to be able to speak on behalf of the Quebec Chiefs and Labrador Chiefs, that he's never spoken to them either. We've seen emails come in from regional directorships saying, we want you to be consulted. We want to consult with you. Going all the way back to early December, before that infamous Chiefs meeting here in Ottawa, talking about those 5 points. And I don't want to talk about the 5 points. If you ask questions later, that's fine. But today, it's more about the outright rejection, and I think the anger that you see and or feel and hear based on my words. People need to understand why we say the things we do and why we take the actions that we do from time to time. This is a perfect opportunity. I believe that Canada will listen at some point. Unfortunately, in our past, it hasn't always been reciprocal in terms of the type of arrangements that have been made. But again, based on our historic alliances and history on this land, I believe they have the obligation to do so once again. This is historic. If it's allowed to run through, and I'm sure my colleagues here from the other provinces and other territories will say the same thing in terms of not allowing it to happen, we need to assure that they hear us. So we're here again today to describe to you, not only in those words, but others as well, what our positions are, but I think it must remain consistent and strong, and it is about control. It's not about money. There are shortfalls in funding. I was part of that meeting with the Assembly of First Nation Chiefs, 300 or so in attendance back in December, and I'll tell you face forward, I was going to say something else, but those 2 chiefs that were supportive of it, proposing and seconding it, are specifically about the funding. And this is not what this is about. It's about control. It's about maintaining historic relationship. And again, I can't say it strong enough, but our position has been constant, and we remain in opposition to whatever this bill they call. Thank you very much. Merci.